The Worst Trip. Tone Deaf is a 2019 horror movie that mixes suspense, dark comedy, and social commentary all at once. The story revolves around Olive Smith, a young woman who's completely worn out after a string of terrible days at work and in her love life. Looking to breathe a little, she decides to spend a weekend in a rented house in the countryside, hoping for silence, nature, and rest. The problem is that the owner of the place, Harvey Parker, absolutely hates millennials, like really hates them. While Olive tries to relax and emotionally recover, Harvey starts showing increasingly strange, aggressive, and violent behavior. Little by little, it becomes clear that she's trapped in a deadly game, being hunted inside the very house where she should feel safe. The fourth wall break comes in when Harvey starts looking straight into the camera multiple times, talking to the audience as if he's scolding an entire generation.
You want to make a difference? You want to be a conduit for change? Here's an idea. Go drink a gallon of bleach. Excuse me for being a touch indelicate, but when you live to be my age, you see the bigger picture, and life's all about hard work and sacrifice.
He complains about spoiled young people, criticizes social media, mocks the lack of responsibility, and practically demands that viewers get their act together. These moments are intentionally uncomfortable because the movie wants you to feel included in the attack. Director Richard Bates Jr. conceived the film as a satire about generational conflict, almost like a social experiment with slasher elements mixed in. The Cursed Livestream. Deadstream is a 2022 found footage horror film that works as a sharp satire of influencer culture. The plot follows Sean, an arrogant vlogger who lost his career after an extremely irresponsible challenge went wrong. Cancelled online and desperate for public redemption, he decides to make a big comeback by live streaming an entire night inside the Death Manor, an abandoned house rumored to be haunted.
This is Sean Ruddy coming to you live from Death Manor.
The idea is simple: prove his bravery, gain likes, and win back followers. But everything starts spiraling out of control when supernatural events begin happening, and Chrissy, his biggest fan, shows up at the location without warning. From that point on, what was an online spectacle turns into a literal nightmare, with strange entities, doors slamming shut on their own, and Sean being attacked while thousands of people watch. The key difference here is that almost the entire movie is already a fourth wall break. Sean talks directly to the chat, responds to comments, asks for donations, and even complains when he loses subscribers. As viewers, we feel like part of the live stream, which makes everything more intense because every scare feels like it's happening live. Shared Curse. Incantation is a Taiwanese horror film that became a local phenomenon, turning into one of the biggest box office hits in the country's history. The story follows Lee Ronan, a desperate mother trying to save her young daughter Dodo from a supernatural curse. Years earlier, Lee and her boyfriend took part in a forbidden ritual tied to an obscure religious cult, messing with forces that should never have been awakened. Since then, strange deaths start happening around her, and her daughter begins showing terrifying behavior. The movie pulls the viewer into the story right from the start. Lee speaks directly to the camera, asks for help, teaches a symbol, and invites the audience to repeat a kind of prayer. It all feels like a sincere attempt to break the curse and protect the child. Then comes the twist. Later on, Lee reveals that the chant you repeated along with her wasn't exactly meant to heal. In reality, it was designed to spread the curse to as many people as possible. The more people who take part, the weaker the curse becomes for her daughter. In other words, the audience becomes part of the ritual without realizing it. This is where the fourth wall break reaches another level, because the film turns you into a direct accomplice to the tragedies on screen. Director Kevin Ko drew inspiration from real Taiwanese urban legends and ancient folk practices to create the film's symbols and chants. The Cursed Chair. The Devil's Chair is a low-budget British horror film from 2007 that starts off simple and ends in a way no one expects. The story follows Nick West, a guy who ends up committed to a psychiatric hospital after a casual night with a girl, ends in an absurdly bloody way. The reason? An old torture chair supposedly cursed that simply kills anyone who sits in it. 5 years later, an extremely confident psychiatrist decides that the best possible therapy is to take Nick back to the site of the trauma. He, his assistant, and Nick return to the abandoned factory where everything happened, trying to prove the object is nothing more than superstition. From there, the movie becomes a constant tension game, with the characters repeatedly getting dangerously close to the chair while strange things start happening around them. Doors creak, shadows appear, and the feeling that something is about to go wrong grows stronger by the minute. When someone finally sits in the chair, chaos erupts. Blood, screams, violent deaths, everything you'd expect from a low-budget slasher. But then comes the turn. The narrator of the story looks straight into the camera and practically apologizes for how insane everything has become, before staring at the audience with a look of disapproval as if saying, "Do you really enjoy this kind of movie?"
As you can see, it all got a bit silly at this point. Girl with her puppies out, demon, old banana in pajamas. Is this what I promised you? Are we prick teasing you enough? Are you full up? Is this what you came here to see, old my brothers.
It's a completely unexpected fourth wall break, almost mocking horror fans in the movie itself. Despite being torn apart by critics at the time of its release, the film eventually gained a cult following precisely because of this bizarre meta twist. The Disturbing Confession. The House That Jack Built is Lars von Trier's most brutal return to cinema in 2018. A psychological horror film that blends art, extreme violence, and direct provocation of the audience. The story follows Jack, a frustrated architect who ends up finding purpose as a serial killer. Over several years, he commits a series of increasingly cruel crimes, narrating everything as if he's presenting his own artistic work. Listening to these confessions is Verge, a mysterious character who functions as a kind of conscience, spiritual guide, and silent judge. The film is structured in chapters, each showing a different incident from Jack's criminal career. Between murders, he delivers long monologues about architecture, painting, classical music, and aesthetics, trying to justify his actions as creative expression. The fourth wall break happens indirectly. Jack speaks to Verge, but in practice, he's speaking to us.
So, Jack, in the face of an admittedly unbearable lady, was great art. Is that what I'm to make of it?
At many points, the movie feels like it's pointing a finger at the viewer, questioning why we're watching, why we feel curiosity, and even pleasure when seeing stylized violence. It's as if the film uses Jack as a mirror, forcing the audience to confront its own fascination with the macabre. Its premiere at Cannes led dozens of people to walk out of the theater, while others gave it a standing ovation. Matt Dillon was so widely praised that many consider this the best performance of his career. The Cruel Duo. Funny Games is a 1997 psychological horror film, and possibly the most radical example of fourth wall breaking ever made in the genre. The story follows a wealthy family spending their vacation in a lakeside house, expecting peaceful days. Everything changes when two extremely polite young men show up asking to borrow some eggs. Within minutes, the friendly tone turns into a brutal home invasion. With no clear explanations, the young men begin physically and psychologically torturing the family, turning the weekend into a prolonged nightmare. The twist is that the attackers know they're in a movie. They look straight into the camera, make ironic comments, wink at the audience, and even place bets on who will survive. At first, it feels like a strange provocation. Later, it becomes deeply unsettling. In one of the most famous moments, when a victim finally fights back and kills one of the invaders, the other simply grabs a remote control and rewinds the movie itself, erasing the character's victory. That's when Haneke makes it clear that the viewer has absolutely no power. The director later made a shot-for-shot American remake in 2007, starring Naomi Watts and Tim Roth, specifically to target audiences who consume this kind of violence as entertainment. Haneke has stated that he created Funny Games as a direct attack on the audience, criticizing the pleasure of watching fictional suffering. The Final Stare. In the 2012 The Woman in Black, we follow Arthur Kipps, played by Daniel Radcliffe, a young lawyer still devastated by his wife's death. To prove himself at work, he's sent to an isolated mansion in a coastal village to organize the documents of a deceased client. The place is surrounded by marshland, accessible only at certain times, and carries a heavy atmosphere from the very first minute. As soon as Arthur arrives, children in the area begin suffering horrific accidents. Little by little, he uncovers the legend of the Woman in Black, a vengeful spirit tied to the death of her own child. Every time someone sees the dark figure, another child dies. The film builds its horror in a classic way, with empty hallways, creaking doors, toys moving on their own, and brief appearances in the background of the frame. Nothing overly graphic, but extremely effective. The fourth wall break comes at the end. After everything, Arthur dies and reunites with his family in the afterlife, creating a false sense of relief. But in the final second, the Woman in Black slowly turns her face directly toward the camera, staring at you. It's not a traditional jump scare, it's a cold, silent look that makes it feel like the curse has crossed the screen. A simple, elegant, and chilling ending that turns the viewer into the next victim. Ripped Reality. In the Mouth of Madness is a 1994 cosmic horror film that closes John Carpenter's so-called Apocalypse trilogy after The Thing and Prince of Darkness. The story follows John Trent, a skeptical, pragmatic insurance investigator hired to find Sutter Kane, an extremely popular horror writer who vanished shortly before the release of his new book. Kane is treated like a cultural phenomenon, with obsessed fans and readers literally breaking down after consuming his work. Following a series of disturbing clues, Trent eventually arrives in Hobbs End, a town that simply should not exist. There, he discovers that Kane isn't just an author. He's a near-divine entity, capable of shaping reality through his stories. The biggest shock comes when Trent realizes that he himself is a character created by Kane.
Dared into the illimitable gulf of the unknown.
His entire life is part of a written narrative, and the world is about to end with the premiere of the film adaptation of Kane's book. The fourth wall break is completed in the final moments. Institutionalized in a mental hospital, Trent escapes and goes to a movie theater to watch In the Mouth of Madness, the very same film you're watching. He laughs alone, completely defeated, realizing there's no escape and that the apocalypse has already begun. It's existential horror that turns the viewer into part of the end of the world. The Final Call. Unfriended is a 2015 horror film that went all in on a simple but unconventional concept. The movie follows a group of students gathered in what seems like a normal Skype call. Little by little, they realize that someone, or something, has joined the conversation. It soon becomes clear that it's the spirit of Laura Barnes, a classmate who was booked after a humiliating video went viral and ultimately took her own life. Now, Laura is back to collect. The entire narrative unfolds in real time and exclusively through the laptop screen of Blair, one of the girls in the group. We see messages pop up, windows open, files being sent, and secrets coming to light as the teens start dying one by one. This format turns the viewer into yet another participant in the call, watching everything as if spying on a private conversation that went horribly wrong. In the end, after everyone is dead and only Blair remains, this happens. No! The final image makes it feel like Laura is attacking you directly. Shameless Show. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is the 1975 film adaptation of the Broadway musical that became a phenomenon precisely because it embraces audience participation as part of the experience. The story begins when Brad and Janet, a straight-laced, newly engaged couple, get a flat tire on a deserted road during a rainy night. Looking for help, they end up inside a strange castle inhabited by eccentric figures, led by the unforgettable Dr. Frank N. Furter, played by Tim Curry. From there on, the film turns into a carnival of music, eroticism, science fiction, and dark humor.
Caught with a flat world. How about that? Well, baby.
The fourth wall is broken in several ways. A criminologist frequently interrupts the narrative to explain directly to the audience what's going on, as if presenting a documentary.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey. It seemed a fairly ordinary night when Brad Majors and his fiancée, Janet Weiss.
At another point, Dr. Scott literally turns to the camera during the dinner scene and speaks to the viewer. Tim Curry takes it even further. His Frank N. Furter constantly throws knowing glances, makes suggestive gestures, and performs as if fully aware that an audience is watching his every move. To this day, the film is famous for its interactive screenings, where fans throw rice, shout specific lines, and attend dressed as the characters. In some countries, it became tradition to watch it with a full response script. Exposed Mind. American Psycho is a satirical slasher that blends social criticism, dark humor, and a direct descent into the mind of a completely broken protagonist. The story follows Patrick Bateman, a young investment banker in New York, obsessed with status, appearance, and social approval. By day, he's just another 1980s yuppie, wearing expensive suits, talking about trendy restaurants, and comparing business cards like trophies. By night, according to his own account, he becomes a brutal killer. The main fourth wall break happens through voiceover narration. Patrick talks to the audience constantly, explaining who he is, what he values, and how he sees the world. That's how we get inside his head, something that would be impossible just by watching his external behavior, since he's always hiding behind a perfectly rehearsed social mask. The famous business card scene makes this crystal clear.
Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my God. It even has a watermark.
Something wrong?
While everyone pretends not to care, Patrick has an internal meltdown when he sees cards that are slightly more elegant than his own. The narration reveals a man on the edge, trapped in a system where tiny differences mean everything. But there's a disturbing detail. Patrick may be lying. The film leaves it ambiguous whether the murders actually happened or if they're all delusions. That turns Bateman into an unreliable narrator, someone who may be inventing his own crimes just to feel some kind of power. Christian Bale reportedly drew inspiration from Tom Cruise to create the character's empty smile and artificial charisma. Controlled Terror. The Cabin in the Woods is a horror film that dismantles every genre cliché while pretending to be just another story about young people spending a weekend in the middle of nowhere. The plot follows 5 friends who travel to a cabin deep in the woods. There's the athlete, the pure girl, the smart one, the stoner, and the popular friend. Everything feels extremely familiar, and that's exactly the point. What they don't know is this. Every single move is being monitored by a team working in an ultra-secret underground facility. These employees control the environment, release monsters, manipulate decisions, and basically direct the horror like a lab experiment. Each character must fulfill a specific archetype for an ancient ritual to be completed. While the young people fight for their lives, the technicians place bets, crack jokes, and make ironic comments about what's happening, often sounding exactly like horror fans watching a movie. Even without looking directly at the camera, the film constantly flirts with the fourth wall by turning these characters into stand-ins for the audience itself. The script was co-written by Joss Whedon and is packed with Easter eggs, especially in the scene where dozens of different creatures are unleashed at once. That moment references nearly every horror subgenre imaginable. Freddy Krueger. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is a 1994 horror film that dives headfirst into meta-storytelling. Here, Freddy Krueger isn't just invading dreams, he's invading the real world. In the story, a malevolent entity begins manifesting in the form of Freddy, angry that the character has become a joke after so many weak sequels. To reclaim his power, this darker version of the villain decides to attack the very people who created him. That includes director Wes Craven himself, actor Robert Englund, and Heather Langenkamp, the original Nancy, all playing fictional versions of themselves. Heather portrays an actress trying to care for her young son while experiencing increasingly real nightmares. Phones ring by themselves, claws tear through walls, and Freddy starts crossing the boundary between cinema and reality. The fourth wall break here is wild because the film basically says Freddy only exists because we watch him. He needs the audience's attention to survive. Robert Englund switches between playing himself and Freddy, using a far more frightening look than in previous sequels. Wes Craven appears as a character writing the very script you're watching, as if receiving supernatural visions. This insane concept later inspired Scream, but no other Craven film was so direct in showing a monster literally attacking its creator. It's surreal, creative, and genuinely unsettling. On screen, there's a video showing every single time Freddy Krueger died in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Click and watch. I'll see you there.